Revenge served cold from her newfound dimension. A betrayed strategist's return from the rift to unravel an empire with silence, illusion, and cosmic justice, forging a legacy beyond vengeance as the Riftwalker who brought balance to worlds, not through war or power, but through the consequences of truth and memory. Ava Lee's life had always been shaped by restraint. In the grand empire of Varelia, where politics spun endlessly and ambition bloomed in gilded corridors, she walked carefully, offering wisdom without demanding reward and loyalty without stipulation. Born to House Lee, a modest yet respected family on the lower rung of the nobility, she was known for her calm presence and cultivated brilliance. At court, she held no titles of power. But her quiet influence ran deeper than many realized. It was through her efforts that alliances were mended, and that whispers of rebellion were pacified before reaching the ears of the crown. She bore no fanfare, only silent effectiveness. Her closeness to the royal family began in her youth, when she was chosen to accompany the young Prince Kaelin as a companion and tutor in philosophy and diplomacy. Over time, her presence became indispensable. She guided him with care and loyalty, watching as he grew into a man shaped by discipline and burdened by expectations. Her affection for him matured into something deeper, private, and unspoken. In him, she saw not just a future emperor, but a kindred spirit who once valued her counsel above all others. When the empress grew ill and her grip on the court weakened, Ava stepped into the vacuum discreetly. She managed the networks of courtly relationships with precision, defending Kaelin from enemies and maneuvering him safely through political storms. When his path to the throne was nearly obstructed by a powerful coalition of rival houses, it was Ava who uncovered their plans and orchestrated the quiet dismantling of their schemes. Yet even then, she sought nothing but his success. Love unconfessed and unconditional was enough to steady her hand. But the closer Kaelin moved to the imperial crown, the more his world filled with new voices. Among them emerged Lysandra of House Vareth, a woman whose beauty concealed a calculating hunger for power. With a highborn pedigree and flawless courtly grace, she quickly captivated Kaelin's eye. Where Ava had been the quiet strategist behind the scenes, Lysandra was the dazzling presence by his side. In public, she reinforced Kaelin's image as a rising ruler. In private, she began her campaign to dismantle every threat to her influence, including Ava. Ava recognized the danger early, but she underestimated the depths of Lysandra's ambition. Slowly, Ava found herself pushed out of intimate circles. Her advice was dismissed more often, and her appearances in the palace were requested less frequently. Yet her devotion held firm. She suspected Lysandra's manipulation but refused to act against her without proof. Then came the betrayal, not gradual, not ambiguous, but thunderous and final. Lysandra accused Ava of treason. She claimed Ava had consorted with rogue mages from the Outlands and had used forbidden magic to influence the royal court. She painted a narrative of Ava as a sorceress cloaked in deception, pulling strings for her own rise to power. At first, the court hesitated to believe it. Ava had served faithfully for years. But Lysandra came prepared with forged letters, bribed witnesses, and false magical artifacts allegedly found in Ava's quarters. Kaelin, who had once trusted Ava implicitly, gave no chance for rebuttal. His heart, perhaps clouded by jealousy, perhaps by a need to prove his loyalty to his new empress, turned ice cold. In front of the court, he ordered her exile to the Rift, a mystical realm known only in legend and horror. A place thought to be a fracture in reality itself, where time lost meaning and magic reigned unbound. None had ever returned from it. Ava, shackled and stripped of name and title, was taken under armed guard to the edge of the rift and cast into its swirling chasm. The descent was endless. She woke in a world unshaped by logic or nature, a realm where gravity twisted sideways, where the sky changed colors with her emotions, and where beings of abstract form drifted like thoughts through space. Her body ached, her mind spun, but she endured. The initial days, or perhaps years, it was impossible to tell, were spent simply surviving. She walked endlessly through floating plains, climbed staircases that led to no doors, and drank from fountains of crystal memory. Here, her mind became her greatest weapon and her greatest vulnerability. The realm responded to thought, to feeling, to will. Those with weak minds would be consumed by illusion. But Ava's resolve was tempered in betrayal. Each moment she remembered Kaelin's cold eyes, Lysandra's smirk, and the silence of the empress she once loved. As the rift molded itself around her, so too did she mold herself to the rift. It started slowly. The floating orbs of energy that hovered above her head became tools. She discovered she could will them to form weapons, to bind wounds, and to illuminate paths through the darkest forests of the dimension. Her senses evolved. She no longer walked with her feet, but stepped through intention. She spoke to the winds and heard them answer in symbols and light. Time stopped being a chain and became a field she could touch. Ava was no longer merely a survivor. She was a student of the realm's madness, learning its logic through pain, patience, and instinct. The rift showed her its truths. It was not a prison, but a crucible, a place that shattered what entered and reforged it anew. She met echoes of herself, reflections of who she might have been in different worlds, in other timelines. She saw one version of herself who ruled as empress beside Kaelin, another who had died young in a border skirmish, and yet another who had led a rebellion against him. These glimpses reminded her of possibility, of how far her fall had been. And with each memory, each fragment of betrayal, the fire of vengeance rekindled. Eventually, she discovered the fractures between the thin veils between dimensions, like translucent walls she could push against. With intense focus, she slipped through them. The first attempts led her to dreamlike realms, where her presence dissolved after moments. But she grew stronger. Her understanding of spatial weaving, of time knotting, of illusion crafting skills the rift embedded into her essence allowed her to linger, to walk between, to inhabit dimensions for longer stretches. She trained herself to stabilize her form. She hunted creatures of shadow and light that tested her limits. She spoke with beings ancient and unknowable, some of whom offered her riddles, others who fled her growing strength. She built weapons of thought and armor of memory. Every trial deepened her mastery. The woman who had once bent over parchment scrolls in a Virelian library now bent reality itself with her will. When at last she found the path back to her home dimension, she stood not as Ava the noblewoman, but as Ava the Riftwalker reborn by exile, hardened by solitude, armed with powers no empire could comprehend. Her return was quiet. She emerged in the outskirts of Virelia under a moonless sky, unnoticed and unknown. Her form was cloaked in glamour, her features hidden behind shifting shadows. She had no intention of announcing her return. Not yet. Vengeance required patience, precision, and calculation. The world had moved on. The empire thrived under Kaelin's rule, or so it seemed. But Ava saw the rot beneath the gold. Kaelin's grip on the throne was weakening. His campaigns along the borderlands had stalled. Discontent simmered among the merchant guilds. Noble families once allied with him grew restless, left behind in the shadow of Lysandra's expanding influence. Ava smiled as she observed. The empire she had once served was devouring itself slowly. She took no allies, trusting none. From the shadows, she intervened surgically. A letter never arrived at its destination. A noble's son vanished during a hunting trip. A supply shipment intended for the northern front was rerouted, delayed just long enough to spark defeat. Small wounds easily explained, each individually meaningless. But Ava understood how empires bled not from one blade, but 1,000 pinpricks. She seeded visions into the minds of courtiers using rift-born illusions. Some claimed to see her ghost. Others heard her voice warning of downfall. Rumors spread like wildfire, untamed and untethered. Servants muttered stories of the betrayed shadow who had returned to haunt the crown. Kaelin dismissed them at first, but doubt crept into his eyes when he began to dream of her. Night after night, he awoke drenched in sweat, her face flashing behind his eyes, not the loyal Ava he once knew, but a stranger with burning eyes and a voice made of thunder and silence. Lysandra began to wither. Her beauty faded inexplicably. The enchanted oils she favored stopped working. Her voice, once musical, turned hoarse and brittle. She summoned seers and priests, but none could cleanse the growing dread that wrapped around her like a shroud. Her dreams twisted into nightmares, visions of being swallowed by a chasm of stars and shadows. She blamed Kaelin, accusing him of inviting a curse upon them by refusing to honor Ava's memory. But the court only whispered behind closed doors, too frightened to speak aloud the name of the one they now feared had become a deity of vengeance. Ava moved like a phantom through the Empire's systems. She watched council meetings through reflective surfaces, turned informants with promises whispered into their sleep, and disguised herself as 100 faces to walk within the palace without being noticed. Every step she took unraveled another thread of Kaelin's empire. And in the heart of it all, she remained silent. There were no declarations, no confrontations, and no demands, only the cold, precise execution of a vendetta born not from wrath, but from justice. She visited her old estate in secret one night, finding it abandoned and overtaken by vines. The once serene gardens were wild and overgrown. In the remains of her library, she found a journal she had once kept, its ink faded but still legible. She read her younger self's dreams and quietly burned them. That life was gone. She no longer mourned what was stolen. She had become something greater than revenge alone. But revenge was not yet complete. Ava Lee, reborn by exile and shaped by the rift's chaos, had positioned herself like a needle through the seams of Virelia's fragile imperial tapestry. Her return was no longer a matter of survival or even vengeance in its rawest form. it had evolved into something far more deliberate. She was not simply here to punish Kaelin and Lysandra. She was here to ensure the Empire itself learned the cost of betrayal. Her hand was now entwined with fate's fabric, pulling and twisting threads with the elegance of a master seamstress, until the whole garment unraveled by its own internal weaknesses. The rumors she had sown had matured into widespread unrest. Nobles who once propped up Kaelin's regime had begun to hedge their allegiance, preparing for the possibility of a shift in power. The merchants in the southern provinces began withholding their taxes, citing increased banditry and logistical failures. Failures Ava herself had arranged by rerouting caravans using rift-borne illusions and misleading guides. Soldiers stationed on the borders received conflicting orders sent through falsified channels, further undermining trust in the imperial command structure. Ava never needed to raise a blade. The collapse she engineered required no armies, only silence, whispers, and shadows. Kaelin, once the image of sovereign confidence, now reigned in fear. He paced his chambers late into the night, reading reports that contradicted one another, dismissing trusted advisors one by one until his counsel was hollowed out. His paranoia grew into obsession, and soon his judgments were erratic, driven by unseen terrors. He executed 3 of his generals within a fortnight, convinced of a conspiracy among them. The court began to fracture openly. Loyalties, once carefully cultivated, turned brittle under the pressure of Kaelin's unraveling sanity. But Ava did not move for the throne, though she could have. Her reach was unmatched. Her knowledge of the Empire's infrastructure, its weaknesses, its dependencies, and its secrets surpassed even the Emperor's. She had, after all, helped design much of its inner workings. The temptation to seize power flickered at times in her mind, but she dismissed it. To take what they had offered only through exile would be to validate their twisted logic. Her vengeance was not for conquest. It was for reckoning. Lysandra's decline accelerated. Her body, once radiant with vitality, bore signs of a mysterious decay. Her skin paled to an unnatural pallor. Her voice grew faint, her movements sluggish. She consulted mages in secret, but each found themselves disturbed in her presence. Her aura, they claimed, felt fractured. Ava had never laid a hand on her, not in the physical sense. Instead, she had burdened Lysandra with a subtle curse drawn from the rift, a slow unraveling of energy, a disturbance in the harmony of body and spirit. To others, it appeared as illness or divine punishment. But to Ava, it was justice rendered through the very fabric of existence. As the Empress withered, so too did her influence. The aristocracy began to abandon her, fearful of being tainted by the growing whispers that she had invoked Ava's wrath. Even servants refused to remain in her quarters after sunset, having heard weeping that came from no mouth or seen reflections of a woman cloaked in shadow pacing silently behind her. Lysandra grew reclusive. Her once opulent chambers transformed into a dark sanctuary sealed with runes and guarded around the clock. But no number of guards could ward off what she feared most: Ava's presence, unseen and everywhere. The turning point came when Ava infiltrated the palace's restricted sanctum, the memory vaults. There, encased in crystalline matrices, were stored visions of key decisions and council meetings, safeguarded for historical record and magical inquiry. Ava altered them with precision. She edited moments of Kaelin's coronation to replace cheers with murmurs of dissent. She rewrote his war plans to appear sabotaged by his own hand. She infused these memories with such subtlety that even the royal archivists could not distinguish illusion from reality. When the council convened to view these events, urged by Ava's disguised messengers, they found themselves horrified. Doubt, once whispered, was now etched in magical stone. A vote of no confidence followed. Kaelin, isolated and humiliated, was stripped of executive power by decree of the nobility. Rather than risk civil war, the council opted for containment. The former emperor was confined to the azure wing of the palace, a lush but inescapable set of chambers protected by enchantments and guarded day and night. To the public, he remained the nominal figurehead. In truth, he had become a relic of a failed age. Kaelin did not resist. By then, his mind was already adrift in a sea of memories, real and fabricated, blending into one another. He spoke rarely, except to mention Ava's name in tones of awe and dread. He claimed to see her in the rain and to hear her breath in the rustle of curtains. His days became loops of silence and fractured whispers. Servants left his meals untouched. He refused to meet any council member's gaze. What he feared most was not execution or disgrace. It was the idea that she might still be watching, not for pity, but for closure. Lysandra's end came with less ceremony. One night, her guards found her chambers empty. The wards remained unbroken, the windows sealed. Her final hour was unknown, her last words unrecorded. Only a single rift-marked stone remained in the center of her bed, glowing faintly with ethereal light. The court panicked. The Empress's disappearance, coinciding with the Emperor's collapse, birthed countless rumors. Some claimed she had been claimed by the Rift. Others whispered she had tried to beg Ava for mercy and was cast into a deeper dimension. Officially, she was declared dead. Unofficially, no one dared mention her name. Ava did not linger in the palace. Her vengeance was fulfilled. The empire she once served lay humbled, its leaders broken by their own misdeeds, not by her hand, but by the consequences they had sown. She visited once more the ruins of her family estate, now slowly reclaimed by nature. There, amid crumbling walls and moss-covered stones, she reflected on the woman she had been obedient, faithful, patient. That Ava was gone, not lost, but evolved. From the edge of her ancestral home, she opened a portal into the Rift, not as a prisoner, but as a master. The realm welcomed her like an old companion, bending space and form to her will. But this time, she did not enter it alone. She had left pieces of herself behind in Varelia, not physical remnants, but echoes, enchantments woven into ley lines, symbols carved into foundations. These were not traps or curses, but safeguards. She had become more than a myth. She was now a tether between dimensions, a guardian of balance. The empire, restructured in the wake of the imperial collapse, shifted to a ruling council model. Power, once hoarded by a single throne, was dispersed among elected officials, regional leaders, and guild heads. Varelia adapted, not out of wisdom but necessity. The people, having suffered under ambition masked as divine right, now demanded accountability. Ava had not led the rebellion, she had not formed a movement. But her vengeance, subtle and precise, had triggered a transformation in the hearts of the governed. Years passed. Her name became legend. The Riftwalker, they called her. Some believed she was a spirit, others a goddess. Her story was told in flickering lantern light, always with variations. A woman betrayed, who returned not with armies, but with justice cloaked in silence. Scholars debated her origin. Poets romanticized her return. Children feared and revered her equally. Temples erected small altars to honor her never as a deity, but as a force, a reminder. In other dimensions, her influence was not unnoticed. There were whispers in the crossroads between worlds of a woman who mastered the in-between, who had pierced the veil of realms and returned to rewrite fate itself. Beings of power, ancient and alien, observed her movements with curiosity and caution. She was not bound by one world's limitations. Her vengeance had awakened a potential far beyond retribution. She had become a protector, not of kingdoms or rulers, but of equilibrium. Yet Ava remained elusive. She walked between places, appearing only when imbalance threatened to repeat the sins she had once suffered. In one realm, she quelled a tyrant's uprising by unraveling his dreams until he surrendered to his own doubts. In another, she guided a forgotten child to safety by shifting time just enough for fate to intervene. These acts were not public. They were not remembered. But she did not need remembrance. She had no desire for love, nor for companionship. The Rift had not stolen her humanity. It had refined it. She loved the stars that blinked between folds of existence. She cared for silence as much as for memory. Her vengeance had been cold, but her purpose was now vast and warming in its reach. She understood pain, loss, ambition, and betrayal, and through that understanding she wielded a kind of justice that neither court nor blade could deliver. And so Ava Lee became more than her past. She became the answer to a world that had once cast her into the void. She answered not with rage, but with the weight of what they had made her, a force born not from hate, but from consequence. Her name would echo for generations, not as a call to arms, but as a warning and a promise. The shadows remember.